There is a press ban in South Africa and a state of emergency exists. And the American media is actually following in the footsteps. What can we do specifically to help alleviate the situation in this country?
I urge the media here today to become bold and determined and principled in covering South Africa, but not just covering its bestiality, but covering its alternative. Because even white South Africans need to be freed.
Global Vision presents the television news magazine of Southern Africa.
It doesn't exist on television, and it doesn't exist.
I would actually appeal to the world that information is there and can be found.
Because it is important that people know what is happening.
This week, South Africa Now presents these stories.
Down with apartheid!
Kellogg's. We grew up with their cereals, but now boycotters are saying no. The reason? The company's role in South Africa.
I went to the store and I told my mother she was taking Frosted Flakes and I told her not to take it.
Anglo-American goes global. We'll have the story behind a $5.9 billion takeover bid by South Africa's most powerful monopoly.
If Anglo-American controlled this would greatly increase its influence in the United States and its ties to the U.S. business community, and through that, of course, have influence in political matters as well.
And in our culture segment, boycott buster Laura Branigan plays Sun City for a second time. And music from the Genuines, who introduce us to the sound of Klopsy music. All these stories and more on South Africa Now. First, the news with Fana, Kekana and Carolyn Craven.
Shade. In the aftermath of the assassination of anti-apartheid activist David Webster, the African National Congress is expressing fears that its leadership in exile may be next, with a plan, they say, to blame any killings on so-called internal rivalries between moderates and hardliners inside the ANC. In South Africa, meanwhile, anti-apartheid leaders say Webster's killing was calculated and deliberate, with the police considered the prime suspects.
David Webster's funeral on May 6th was the largest demonstration since the state of emergency went into effect in 1986. Activists speculate the murder was payback for Webster's role in the recent detainees' hunger strike that resulted in the release of hundreds of political prisoners.
Comrade Webster was a very carefully chosen target. His cold-blooded murder is meant to serve as a warning to the increasing number of whites who are daring to associate themselves in word and deed with the oppressed people of the country.
Just days before his death, Webster completed a paper outlining his view that the state resorts to assassinations when it has no other weapons to use against activists. Max Coleman heads the Human Rights Commission.
I would like to remark upon a trend which analysts of state repression, including David Webster, have been observing in recent months. There has been a clear and discernible shift away from the use of formal state repression based in the security laws of the country towards a reliance on informal and often extra-legal forms of repression for which the state can disclaim responsibility.
Meanwhile, police have withdrawn sketches of 3 suspects, and the men have apparently been cleared. Opposition leaders are skeptical of the ability of the police to investigate themselves.
The ordinary people of this country have a strong suspicion that Comrade Webster's assassin is a member of the police force. The investigations conducted by the police will be under the scrutiny of thousands. We want to know who the assassins are.
This is Nadja Smith reporting for South Africa Now.
The South African government is threatening to retaliate for a mortar attack on one of its Defense Force installations carried out in early May by African National Congress guerrillas. In a surprise early morning raid, 21 ANC soldiers slightly damaged the radar station, according to the government. South Africa claims the guerrillas moved from Botswana through Zimbabwe and crossed into South Africa. Foreign Affairs Minister Pick Botha has warned both of these countries that South Africa could strike back.
Also this week, South African President P.W. Botha has sent a personal letter of apology to British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher for last month's blowpipe missile scandal. Botha reportedly expressed regret for the, quote, transgression committed by South African officials. The South Africans admitted that the state official had been involved in the sale of missiles, but denied knowing they were dealing with right-wing Irish terrorists.
If you were an American teacher interested in educating your students about apartheid, what product would you choose to make the connection in your classroom? An organization called Educators Against Apartheid has turned their kids on to the case of Kellogg's, the famous American cereal maker, which also does business in South Africa.
They were chanting on the steps of New York City Hall.
Power to the people!
Public school students opposing apartheid. In their hands, Kellogg cereal boxes, used here as symbols of the call for divestment.
Apartheid kills, and it's wrong.
That Kellogg needs to divest from South Africa. The more we buy Kellogg's, the more richer they become.
I went to the store and I told my mother she was taking Frosted Flakes, and I told her not to take it. It's really helping the apartheid to continue, and we don't want the apartheid to continue. We want blacks and white to have equal rights in South Africa and everywhere.
Teachers like Paula introduced children to the issue of Kellogg's presence in South Africa.
We know that millions of children in this country eat Kellogg cereals, and if we can, through the issue of Kellogg's, educate children about the issue of apartheid and get them involved in doing something very specific to help end apartheid, we're accomplishing a great deal.
The student performance in City Hall was a result of classroom role-playing.
With my class, I have done things like this. Some of the children are the owners of the factory, and some of the children are the workers.
Kellogg's is sending this letter to consumers who are protesting their presence in South Africa. The letter states that for American companies to withdraw would be a victory for the proponents of apartheid. Kellogg's operates a factory of 350 employees outside Johannesburg. This view has not persuaded students like these New York high school kids who remain committed to a boycott.
A great deal of money is in South Africa from other countries, and once those countries divested, South Africa economic will collapse.
When Great Britain was using mercantilism against America, right, in the early colonies, what did they do first? They boycotted their goods before they revolted, remember? Think about that. You must boycott before you revolt.
Week 7 of the Namibia Independence Plan began with reports that South African military forces are finally returning to their bases, ending fighting that left over 300 dead and nearly derailed the fragile transition. Joseph Diescho has more in his Namibia Watch report.
The end of the fighting was good news for the United Nations, whose handling of the crisis has been under attack by African leaders, and improves the chances of getting the complex transition back on schedule. As we reported last week, much of the criticism has focused on this man, Marty Ahtisaari, the official in charge of the UN transition team. Some African diplomats want him fired. Instead, he'll be getting a high-ranking African deputy. The UN also announced it was doubling the size of its international police force in the territory to 1,000. The extra 500 cops will add $40 million to the operations budget, but are needed to cope with a flood of complaints of assault and intimidation of civilians by the South African Army and police. Meanwhile, press coverage of Namibia is also under attack, both figuratively and literally. Stuart Sender has more from the South Africa Now newsroom.
These strong arguments from former President Jimmy Carter and the Reverend Jesse Jackson suggest a context for the lack of news coverage from Southern Africa, including Namibia. This may be why the story of atrocities allegedly committed by South African-backed forces in Namibia, a story we've been covering exclusively on television here, has received as unceremonious a burial as these SWAPO fighters.
The story of the execution
of these 18 SWAPO guerrillas was reported widely in South Africa and Europe, but virtually blacked out in America. We tried to interest other news media in the story, but there were no takers. CBS asked for a copy, suggested it to their South African bureau, but it never made air. NBC also screened it, but said they felt there wasn't enough proof. ABC's Peter Jennings personally asked for a copy of the show, told Newsday he'd taken considerable note of it, but ABC never followed up. And a producer at the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour told us, "We've already done Namibia." Media coverage of Namibia in this country was savaged in the Wall Street Journal and The Nation by Alexander Coburn, who said that South Africa virtually orchestrated how the story was played. In Namibia, Kongstap Breum, a Danish journalist, explains how they did it.
In the north, in the fighting area, they had press conference 2 times a day. The military up there was, the South African troops were providing information on a scale that was just unreal. I mean, they had guides, they had maps, they had people pointing at, here's the fighting, here's the terrorists, what are we going to do, and so on. They're catering for the press like they were honorary guests, which is very nice when you're a journalist.
And on May 7th, another journalist in Namibia, photographer John Liebenberg, who took these pictures for the photo agency AfriPix, was shot at repeatedly by a gunman from a passing car. For years, his photographs have exposed South African repression in Namibia, but they are rarely seen in this country. So as journalists critical of South Africa face threats and harassment, the American media seems to have moved on, abandoning the story of the fight for independence in Africa's last colony. This is Stuart Sender reporting.
You're watching South Africa Now, the television news magazine that goes behind the headlines.
For years now, America's anti-apartheid activists have been demanding that American companies leave South Africa. Unknown to many are the efforts that a major South African company is making to dominate world markets. Jay Weiss has a background report on Anglo-American's takeover bid.
South Africa's wealth is on display to anyone flying over Johannesburg. The refuse from the gold mines are now mountains, and one company remains at the pyramid of power, Anglo-American. It is the engine of the apartheid economy. David Pallister is the author of South Africa, Inc., a book that chronicles the Anglo Empire.
And they are probably the largest producer of gold, the largest producer of platinum in the Western world. They run the diamond cartel, De Beers, which markets about 85% of the world's diamonds, and they are very powerful industrially in the South African economy.
Anglo-American is best known for its diamonds, but soon it could be known as well for the American companies it controls. Anglo, through its international investment arm, Minorco, is attempting to buy a huge mining conglomerate called Consolidated Gold Fields. The price tag, $5.9 billion. Richard Knight of the American Committee on Africa explains the significance of the takeover.
It links it up with important companies. For instance, Consolidated Gold Fields controls Peabody Coal, the largest coal producer in the United States. So that if Anglo-American controlled this, this would greatly increase its influence in the United States and its ties to the U.S. business community, and through that, of course, have influence in political matters as well.
Here's how the takeover would work. South Africa's Anglo-American seeks to purchase Consolidated Gold Fields of Britain. They in turn own controlling interests in Newmont Mining, the nation's largest gold producer. Newmont controls Peabody Coal, the largest coal mining operation in the United States. Although Anglo has indicated it might sell some of these assets, the deal would create the world's largest gold mining conglomerate and give Anglo vast economic power in the United States.
The American government and the British government are very concerned about this. Anglo has always had a tendency to monopoly, and of course the longest and most successful monopoly in the 20th century has been the De Beers diamond monopoly.
Anglo's multi-billion-dollar bid still has to overcome one last hurdle: antitrust charges in an American court on May 17th. Successful or not, This corporate maneuver illustrates the global reach of South Africa's biggest corporation.
We have a situation where a South African company, which has been going global for many years, but is taking a giant step forward to greatly increase its overseas operations.
Anglo is headed by this man, Harry Oppenheimer, one of the richest men in the world. Oppenheimer, now 80, lives in this estate. And while his finances are secret, his politics are not. He has been a vocal critic of apartheid.
He certainly comes across as being a very vehement opponent of apartheid. But when you actually look at the practice of the company, it's been based on the migrant labor system, which has been one of the main props of the apartheid economy and the apartheid state. And of course, the apartheid state would not exist without all the revenues that they accrue from the gold mining there.
Company executives even met with the African National Congress in Lusaka, Zambia some years back, and their labor relations spokesman, Bobby Godsel, is outspoken.
We're committed to working with the unions through the process of collective bargaining, through that process of negotiation, to try to get a just dispensation, at least in the workplace. And we see that as a beachhead of democracy, a beachhead of a non-racial society that we hope will spread beyond the factory gate and into the broader society.
But here in the mines, black miners go 2 miles underground to dig for Anglo gold. Their labor has created the wealth that has made Anglo one of the largest multinationals in the world. National Union of Mineworkers leader Cyril Ramaphosa has a different attitude.
They make it appear to the public as though they are liberal and progressive. But the reality of the situation, the practical experience that our members have, is completely different. They are the most repressive mining magnates that we have ever had to do business with.
As far as their dealings with the black trade unions is concerned, I think that the big strike last year over the wage demands of the National Union of Mineworkers showed them in their true light. They sacked 40,000 workers and they refused to take back many of the militants. During that strike on the gold fields, 9 people were killed, 500 people were injured. They can be very brutal when they want to be.
The corporation that helped build South Africa's wealth is determined to become a power on the world stage.
I look forward to the day when my black compatriots will take the same kind of pride as I do in the prowess of South African companies in the world marketplace.
Anglo now controls enough shares in Consolidated Gold to make the deal stick.
Anti-apartheid groups oppose the takeover because they oppose the expansion of South African investment abroad. It is not a question of supporting Consolidated Gold Fields, which itself is a very bad company on the whole question of investment in South Africa. And so that it's a matter of opposing greater South African influence in North America and in the United Kingdom.
You're watching South Africa Now. Coming up next, our culture segment, featuring the best music, film, drama, and artistic expression from Southern Africa.
This week, we report on different musicians with different messages. An American singer who seems to like today's South Africa, and some South African artists who don't. In 1985, musicians from all over the world vowed not to play Sun City, a hotel in a South African homeland that's become a symbol of apartheid. Singer Laura Branigan broke that cultural boycott last year, and in May of 1989, she returned to Sun City for a second stint, telling local reporters she is now urging other artists to perform there. The irony is that after she was criticized the first time, she made an attempt to apologize to the United Nations. Rick Dutgar of Artists United Against Apartheid.
They said, well, we were contractually committed. And I said, well, that's really no excuse, you know. And he said, look, we had to play because we were destitute. And I said, look, basically what you're doing is you're taking blood money. And they then said, look, every other artist that has played South Africa is given the opportunity to apologize. Please let us apologize to the United Nations. I said, well, this is a very different case. You're apologizing when you knew full well what you were doing. Other people are given a chance to apologize because they didn't understand the significance of what was going on in South Africa and what the international boycott was all about.
We were unable to speak with Brannigan, seen here in a new video. In the past, she has defended her playing Sun City on the grounds that she was invited by Operation Hunger, an anti-poverty group. A leader of that group denied inviting her.
Laura Brannigan reportedly earned well over $1 million playing Sun City, but at the same time, she tried to give a cover to this concert by calling it a benefit concert, and she donated 100,000 Rand, which is equivalent to $50,000 to Operation Hunger. There's nothing in that donation that makes it a benefit concert or to the benefit of the South African people.
And finally, this week, we introduce you to Glopsa music, the sound of Cape Flats, an area outside of Cape Town created when apartheid laws resulted in the relocation of colored communities. Their song, Die Struggle, is a political song sung mostly in Afrikaans, but the images need no translation.
Thank you for watching South Africa Now. Transcripts are available for $3. Ask for program number 302. South Africa Now will soon be available to public television stations nationwide. If you like what we are doing, urge friends in other parts of the country to request the program from public broadcasting stations in their area. For more information on the issues we are covering, write for a free resource list, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to South Africa Now, the Africa Fund, 198 Broadway, New York, New York, 10038. South Africa Now is produced by Global Vision on a non-profit basis in association with the Africa Fund.